let's talk about forks on our big box bikes, and specifically suspension forks and upgrading them. Here is an example. This is a big box suspension fork. This actually among the better examples, the newer, a little more reinforced, better stanchions, but still, when it comes time for performance upgrades to a big box bike, the suspension fork, I've always said, and many know, is the best bang per buck you can get as far as a quick upgrade to make a big impact on riding, because these, while they are suspension forks, they do so in a rudimentary sense, and they're heavy. I mean, this thing, just holding it up here, you've seen I've been using two hands. These are heavy. When it comes time to upgrade your big box bike to a suspension fork, most people can't go to a high-end RockShox or a Fox, something like that. It's not even counting if that's even economically viable. Many people go for something like this, a Bucklos fork. And I have a Bucklos box over here. There's a reason. I'll talk about that in just a moment. But first, let's talk about the varying grades of suspension forks. I've already mentioned there's RockShox, like I used on Project Ledge X1 Stage 1. And I've already said that they're high-end big box forks. Well, there's also very good budget big box forks like this. This is a Suntour Apixon. This particular one has a through axle. I don't have the skewer in here, but it's set up for a through axle. I think this is 140 millimeters, gets tapered. We'll get into that in just a second. But forks come in varying qualities and calibers, this being, in my opinion, the highest end budget fork. These better Suntours like the Apixon. Then you get down to what I call full-on budget forks, but still upgrades over the factory. We're talking about, that's where this Bucklos brand comes in. And there's a reason that I have these lined up, because every single one of these forks is a Bucklos. And here's a main example, because this one actually branded Bucklos. And I want to talk about this because these forks, while they're good, they're usable. I've used them on mini bikes. You'll see them coming on many more. You're about to see all of these put to use. These forks, you know, they're good and they're a step up from the big box, but they're not outstanding in one way, and that's the strength here of this steerer tube. And I'll talk about that more in just a second as I talk about cutting them down and why that needs to be done. But not only that, Bucklos. So this is a Bucklos. It came in a Bucklos box. Well, these other forks also came in a Bucklos box. ZTZ Racing came in a box just like that. Might even be the box. Bucklos, this one, non-tapered. This is a straight steerer fork. Let's look at another one. LUTU, or LUTU. I don't even know how to pronounce some of these. I don't even know if I'm saying Bucklos correctly. It's just how I've always said it. But LUTU, this also came, actually I do think this is the fork that came in that specific box. I have yet another brand, Bolany, or as many say jokingly, I've even said it myself, Bolany. The Bolany forks. This also purchased and came as a Bucklos. So that brand is kind of universally used amongst these budget forks. Is that a bad thing that these are Bucklos? Well, not particularly. It just matters if you wanted a specific brand. When I purchased this, I was buying it as a Bucklos. I wanted the Bucklos branding because I was going to add some other Bucklos items with it and kind of have a theme on the bike. It came in as a LUTU. Answering the question, what is a Bucklos fork? Well, it can be one of many brands. Basically, I think it's just whoever bought the boxes that say Bucklos. So variation doesn't matter as much as the brand, and the brand doesn't matter really at all, if that makes sense. Because budget performance fork is a budget performance fork. If you're getting an air fork for $129, you're getting a $129 air fork. So let's talk about that. What's the difference between this $250, actually I think I only paid $199 for this one, but they're around $250 if you look for one of these Apixons now, especially with the through axle. But what's the difference in a $250 air fork and one of these? Because of these, I think that ZTZ I purchased for $99, even now with the part shortages and prices being as they are. But all of these, I don't think any of these were over $150. Fine. Well, what's the difference? The difference, I talked about this steerer earlier, because you're going to have to cut down, and I'm answering multiple questions as I'm talking here. So this is question 2. People ask if you can just buy a fork and then put it on the bike. Well, no, you can't. I've panned up just a bit here to show you. Look at the length of the steers on these forks. Now this one has been cut down already. That bucklos on the end there has been cut down. This has not, this has not, this has not, that hasn't. And you can see varying height differences between all the steer tubes on those forks. Well, why is that important? Because head tube. There is a length, and these vary from bike to bike. And as you saw on those forks, the steer tube length varies from bike to bike. Now, I don't have a lower headset cup in this, so I'm just going to loosely put it in here. But let's just assume that this is in there, and you would see right away, this one would be too short for this particular bike or for this particular head tube, because I have to have spacers here, at least one spacer, a minimum of one, and then there's the stem. So most stems, this would be up here. So this one's too short. Let me get one of these other forks. This is on the LUTU, the one that I bought thinking I was getting the Bolany or excuse me, the Bucklos brand. Let me put this in here. And yeah, you see that's way up there. Is that even, that's almost out of camera. That's so far up there. But your stem and handlebars would be way up. That would be BMX styling it without actual BMX style bars. So this definitely needs to be cut down because that is way too long. Good, and thanks for the info, I guess, right? Well, how does that help me if I'm buying a new fork? How do I get that cut down? Well, to do that, you're going to need a few things. First, a tape measure to make sure that you can cut the fork down to the proper length, because trust me, I have made this mistake in both directions. I've had them way too long and accidentally cut them too short, which doesn't hurt as bad on a $129 fork, but really hurts if it's a $600+ fork. And on that RockShox, what is that? A RockShox Revelation I used on Project Ledge X1 Stage 3. I almost cut that too short. So, tape measure. You'll also need a clamp of some sort to clamp the bar in place so you can cut it properly. And that's where this bike hand tool comes in handy. This is a specific tool. The steer tube goes in here, it clamps down, this goes into a vise, and then a hacksaw fits right there in that gap. You get a perfectly clean, straight cut. And that is very important. A clean, straight cut. If you get that steer tube cut at an angle, that's going to present problems, big problems. This device practically eliminates the possibility of that, as long as the steer is clamped down in there properly. But you're also going to need a vise to put this into, and you're going to need a hacksaw. And also, to go along with the tape measure, you're going to need something to mark the fork with so you have a line to know where to cut. Now, two things are going to be happening right now. Number one, hopefully you're seeing me cut down one of these forks using the tools that I just showed you. Number two, I want to talk about the steer that I'm cutting down and why these budget forks aren't as good as a quality fork. This is the steer on the SR Sun Tour Apixon. This isn't even as strong as, say, the RockShox or Fox or something like that. But this steer is magnesium, which is also why I cut these down outside. I don't want that magnesium powder inside my bike barn for me to breathe. So note that. But also, this magnesium steer, I believe these also have magnesium steerers on them, but I can tell you just by cutting down the fork, it takes considerably more, or well, I won't say considerably, but enough to notice, more strokes to cut this steer fork, or one on a RockShox or a Fox, than it does on these. So that can only mean one thing, that the steer on these budget forks is softer metal. Softer means to me that they're not as strong, and I don't think I'm going out on a limb here, just stating the obvious. If it takes less saw strokes to cut through the same size steer tube, then that means it's softer metal. So you need to factor that in, and I do as well. Whenever I upgrade a budget bike, what I'm going to be doing on that bike matters as to what fork that I choose. And you've seen the trails that I ride. I call myself the average rider. I have fun, but I don't do anything fancy. If I were doing big drops, I wouldn't even want to run this Sun Tour fork. I would want to run something definitely high end, but most definitely I would not run a $129 fork. So let's recap what I've talked about here, because I'm answering a lot of questions all in one video. Number one, budget forks. What's better? A Bucklos, a Bolany, a LUTU, a ZTZ. Well, in my experience, they're the same thing because they come in the same box, branded Bucklos. Now, note here, I'm talking same thing as in quality of the build and possibly the factory they came out of, because as you can see, there are variations in how these forks look, but the fact that they come in the same box leads me to believe they're made in the same factory, and I tell you, the steer on that, and that are going to be equally the same resistance when I'm cutting through them. And also the performance is going to be on par with one another if they're the same spec, meaning say 120 millimeters of travel on a 27.5 or 29er fork. It's going to be the same regardless if it's LUTU or if it's Bucklos. And let's talk about one last thing. There is a headset. The factory headset on the new Schwinn bikes come with this. It has its own bearings, so that means you're either going to have to take off the crown race on the factory fork. And here we go. This is the element fork that I showed you earlier, and you can see right there. That's the crown race, and I can tell you, these are a pain to get off. I've even had them where the local bike shop just gave up trying to get these off. So if you were going to use the factory lower headset cup on the new Mongoose Ledge, the Schwinn TAF Comp Boundary, Axum, insert probably another one that I've forgotten, whatever, the Boundary. Yeah, the Boundary. If you're not going to use the factory headset cup, that means you're going to need to buy a new lower headset cup, and they come, I use, fun. This is something you'll see in an upcoming video. Jessica, there's something else. This is a star nut. Let me get this screwed off here, and I'll show you. This has to be installed on a fork. It is not inside of a new fork. Sometimes, well, here, case in point, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 new forks. Of the 6, 1. You can see that little packet taped to the steer tube. That's a star nut. But you're going to need to install the star nut into that fork steer. There are multiple ways to do this. This is the stem cap bolt. So by stem cap, I'm talking about this. This is what you're looking at when you're holding onto your handlebars and you're looking down at the top of the stem cap. There's a little bolt goes in the top of that. Now I have seen, I don't do this, but I've seen it done. People thread this on, they get it centered as well as they can on the top of this steer tube, and they take a hammer and they start smacking at it and they drive this down. Now the problem with that, you have to know exactly how deep to go. There is a specified depth that this needs to be, and also it needs to be perfectly straight. If this is canted just a bit, and that can happen, you can see that stem cap bolt would be at an angle. Again, we're getting into the same problem as if this steer wasn't cut correctly, which is why it's important to use the proper tools to cut this down. So all that needs to be factored in, because you're not just buying $129 or however much you're paying for the fork. You need a way to cut the steer tube down. You need a way to get the crown race off or to put in a new crown race, which is a whole other thing. And you need a way to put this star nut in at the very most basic. You need a way to cut the fork steer, and you need a way to put the star nut into the new fork. And there is a specific tool to do this, and I'll put a link to all this stuff down in the description that I've shown and talked about. But there is a specific tool that easily makes these installable. This is what I use. This is a bike hand tool. Don't know how well you can see that. It's a YC113A. Again, I'll put a link down in the description. The way this works, there is this that slides over the steer tube, and it has a bevel in there. Well, you can see that. It slides down onto the steer tube. The star nut goes onto this, and when this was new, it would grip the star nut and hold it in place, but I have to kind of hold it with my finger because I've used it so much. But insert that down in there. Then I start smacking this with a hammer until it drives all the way down and flush. And once this is flush, that star nut is properly seated at the proper depth. And give you an idea of the depth. So yeah, this makes it easy, but it's also extra money. They're only about 16 bucks, I think. I can't remember exactly, but something to factor in. You're not just buying a budget fork. You need a way to get the star nut in. You need a way to get the fork steer cut down. And you also need to factor in if you are going to be changing the headset, because you'll have to have a crown race, either the old one put on the new fork or a new lower headset that comes with the crown race to install on the fork, especially if you're going from straight steer to a tapered. So there you go. I hope this answered questions, and what happens is I'll get so many questions on the same thing in one day that I think, I need to make a video about that, and that's what's happened here. So comment below if I didn't cover or if you're confused in any way, and I'll see if I can respond to try to read each and every comment. But I hope this helped you out. If you're buying or shopping for a new fork, the summary of it, Bucklos can be any of these brands. They're all okay forks for a big box budget upgrade. They're better than the factory fork for sure, but they're not as good as, say, a Suntour, a Pixon, or some of the higher end forks. So know that. Know your needs versus what you can afford and the demands that you're going to put on that before you plunk down, and also what you need to get these installed. Thanks for watching KevCentral. Comment below if this video was helpful. I hope you're subscribed, and be sure to give this video a thumbs up if you found it informative. That really does help the channel. Have a great day.